Hey guys, tonight go ahead and dim the lights a little. Maybe turn your phone face down. Let your shoulders drop. This is one of those nights where we gently drift through ancient history, not sprint. No pop quizzes, no epic battles, just vibes, mythology, and one extremely overqualified Greek god who somehow still managed to make a mess of his personal life. Tonight, we're talking about Apollo. Yes, that Apollo, god of the sun, god of music, god of poetry, god of prophecy, god of healing, god of plague, because of course one guy had to handle all of that. The ancient Greeks really looked at this golden-haired overachiever and said, yeah, let's just pile everything on him and see what happens. So get comfortable. Let your breathing slow down. We're going to ease into the long, strange, slightly tragic life of Apollo. And fair warning, despite being literally divine, he is going to make very human mistakes, repeatedly, calmly, sometimes beautifully, sometimes embarrassingly. Apollo's story starts before he even exists, which is always a good sign that things are about to be complicated. His father is Zeus, and yes, that Zeus, king of the gods, professional lightning thrower, serial adulterer, walking HR violation of Mount Olympus. Apollo's mother is Leto, a titaness who, frankly, did nothing wrong except catch Zeus's eye, and as we've learned by now, that's enough to ruin your life. Zeus's wife Hera finds out about the pregnancy, because she always does, and immediately goes into full revenge mode. Not on Zeus, of course, never on Zeus. That would be inconvenient. Instead, she decides Leto must suffer. Hera bans Leto from giving birth anywhere on solid land. Mainland? No. Islands? Also no. Basically, Hera turns the entire known world into a no-vacancy sign. So Leto wanders, pregnant, exhausted, rejected everywhere she goes. This is already not a great start for Apollo. Eventually, one small floating island called Delos takes pity on her. Delos is technically not fixed land. It's kind of drifting, so it slips through Hera's legal loophole. Classic mythological fine print. Leto gives birth there. First comes Artemis, Apollo's twin sister. Artemis is born first and immediately helps deliver Apollo, because even as a newborn, Artemis is already competent, efficient, and judging everyone silently. Apollo is radiant, glowing, golden, the kind of baby who probably had perfect posture straight out of the womb. The gods immediately know he's special, and Zeus, feeling vaguely guilty for once, showers him with gifts: a silver bow, a lyre, eternal youth, divine beauty. Basically the starter pack for being insufferably talented. Apollo grows up fast, like very fast. In some versions, he's fully grown in a matter of days, which means he skips the awkward phase entirely. No bad haircuts, no questionable teenage poetry. He goes straight into beautiful, immortal God who knows he's beautiful. One of the first things Apollo does is decide he wants a job. And not just any job. He wants to be the god of prophecy. Specifically, he wants control of the Oracle of Delphi. Unfortunately, that position is already taken by a massive serpent dragon thing named Python. Python lives at Delphi and guards the sacred site. Apollo looks at this ancient creature and decides very calmly that it needs to go. So Apollo kills Python, shoots it repeatedly with arrows. No big dramatic battle, just efficient god-on-monster violence. This act establishes him as a serious divine power, but it also creates a small problem. Python was sacred. You're not really supposed to kill sacred beings without consequences. So Apollo, god of light and reason, must now atone for murder. He does this by serving a period of purification, which in Greek myth logic means he goes and works as a servant for a mortal king, because balance. This is going to be a recurring theme with Apollo. He is powerful, he is divine, he is brilliant, and yet he keeps getting knocked down a peg or two by cosmic accountability. Not permanently, just enough to be mildly humiliating. Eventually, Apollo does take over Delphi. He becomes the god of prophecy. But prophecy, as it turns out, is not as glamorous as it sounds. Apollo does not usually speak directly. Instead, he communicates through priestesses called Pythia, who inhale mysterious vapors and then deliver cryptic messages that are just vague enough to ruin lives. Apollo's prophecies are technically correct. They're also famously unhelpful. If you misunderstand them, that's on you. Apollo will not clarify. He is very much a read the terms and conditions god. Now, while all this professional success is happening, Apollo's personal life is not great. Apollo is deeply romantic. Unfortunately, he is also deeply unlucky in love. And by unlucky, we mean cursed by Eros, the god of love, who once got insulted by Apollo. Apollo mocked Eros for using a tiny bow instead of a real weapon. Eros, being petty and eternal, responded by shooting Apollo with a golden arrow of uncontrollable desire, and Apollo's future love interest with a lead arrow of absolute rejection. This goes exactly how you'd expect. Apollo falls madly in love with Daphne, a nymph who wants absolutely nothing to do with him. He chases her across the countryside, declaring his love, his credentials, his divine resume. Daphne is not impressed. She prays to be saved, and the gods respond by turning her into a laurel tree. Apollo arrives just in time to hug bark. This is rough, even by myth standards. Apollo is heartbroken, but instead of, say, reflecting on his approach to consent, he decides to make the laurel sacred to himself. He wears laurel wreaths forever, because if you can't have the girl, you might as well brand the tree. This pattern repeats a lot. There's Cassandra, a Trojan princess. Apollo gives her the gift of prophecy because he's interested in her. She accepts the gift, then rejects him romantically. Apollo cannot take the gift back, so instead he adds a curse. Cassandra will always tell the truth. No one will ever believe her. Which is devastating, tragic, and honestly one of the worst divine breakup responses imaginable. Apollo moves on, or tries to. There's Coronis, a mortal woman he actually manages to be with. Things seem fine, until Apollo finds out she's been unfaithful. Instead of handling this like a calm god of reason, Apollo reacts by killing her, or having her killed. Sources vary. What does not vary is that he immediately regrets it. As Coronis is dying, Apollo saves their unborn child from her womb. That child is Asclepius, who grows up to be the god of medicine, so at least something good comes out of the emotional wreckage. Apollo's romantic history is basically a long scroll of yearning, rejection, punishment, regret, and symbolic plants. And yet, somehow, he remains the ideal. The Greeks adored him. He represented balance, harmony, rational thought. He was the god you prayed to for healing, and also the god who might send a plague if he felt disrespected. Duality. Apollo is also deeply competitive, which brings us gently to music. Apollo is the god of music, specifically the lyre. He is very proud of this, so proud that when a satyr named Marsyas invents a flute and dares to challenge Apollo to a music contest, Apollo accepts, because how could he not? He's Apollo. The contest is judged by the Muses. Apollo wins, obviously, and then, in a move that feels slightly unhinged for a god of beauty and moderation, he has Marsyas flayed alive for losing. We're going to gloss over that part gently. This is a sleep story. Just know that Apollo has moments where he goes from chill artist to, wow, that escalated very quickly. Despite these moments, Apollo remains one of the most stable Olympians, which says more about Olympus than it does about Apollo. He values order. He values structure. He wants to know things. He's the god people turn to when they want clarity, even if that clarity comes wrapped in riddles. As we drift toward the end of this first part, Apollo is fully established. He is radiant, respected, slightly feared, emotionally complicated, surrounded by symbols of perfection that hide a long trail of romantic disasters and moral overreactions. In the next part, we'll float deeper into Apollo's relationships with mortals, his rivalry with other gods, and the quiet ways his influence shapes entire civilizations. No rush, no drama, just steady, golden light, and a god who really could have benefited from therapy. All right, welcome back. If you drifted off a little, that's perfect. That's the goal. Just gently float back in. Apollo is still here, still glowing, still emotionally complicated, still making choices. By the time Apollo is fully settled into Olympus, he's everywhere. His temples are scattered across Greece and beyond. His oracles are consulted before wars, marriages, voyages, and bad financial decisions. Kings listen to him. Generals panic over his words. Ordinary people bring him offerings and hope he's in a good mood that day. Apollo likes order. He likes routine. He likes things to make sense. Mortals, unfortunately, do not always cooperate. Apollo has a strange relationship with humanity. On one hand, he genuinely cares. He teaches medicine, he promotes music and poetry, he encourages balance and moderation. On the other hand, he has zero patience for disrespect, and his definition of disrespect can be flexible. Take the Trojan War, for example. Apollo is heavily involved, not because he loves war, but because he loves fairness, or what he considers fairness. When the Greeks insult one of his priests, Apollo responds by calmly sending a plague through their camp. No shouting, no lightning bolts, just disease. Because that's his department too. This is very Apollo. Quiet punishment, elegant consequences. He later helps guide Paris's arrow to Achilles' heel, and not because he's particularly invested in Achilles personally, because balance must be restored. Apollo is not emotional about it. He's procedural. Apollo's presence in mortal affairs is often subtle. He nudges, he hints, he whispers. He does not hold your hand. If you misinterpret him, that's unfortunate, but also kind of your fault. Which brings us back to prophecy. Apollo's oracles are infamous for a reason. They never lie, they just don't explain themselves. A king asks if he will win a war. Apollo says a great kingdom will fall. The king assumes it's the enemy's. Spoiler, it's his own. Apollo shrugs, metaphorically. He told the truth. This has led to centuries of people both worshipping and resenting him. He is reliable, but not comforting. Clear, but not kind. A very ancient version of customer support that technically solves your problem, but leaves you emotionally unsatisfied. Now, let's talk about Apollo's friendships, because those exist too. Sometimes. Apollo is close to Hermes, which is interesting because Hermes once stole Apollo's cattle as a baby. Instead of punishing him, Apollo admired the audacity. Hermes invented the lyre as an apology. Apollo loved it. They became friends. This says a lot about Apollo. He respects creativity and confidence, especially when it's weird. Apollo also spends a lot of time with the Muses, 9 goddesses of inspiration, music, poetry, memory. They hang out, they collaborate, they vibe. Apollo is at his best here, calm, focused, not chasing anyone, just creating beauty. But inevitably, he falls in love again. One of Apollo's more famous mortal lovers is Hyacinthus, a beautiful Spartan prince, young, athletic, beloved by many, including Apollo. This relationship is different. It's mutual, it's peaceful, it's happy, which in Greek myth means it is doomed. One day Apollo and Hyacinthus are throwing a discus together, just casually, athletic bonding. Unfortunately, the discus strikes Hyacinthus in the head. He dies. Sometimes it's an accident. Sometimes it's jealousy from another god. Either way, Apollo is devastated. He holds Hyacinthus as he dies. He cannot heal him. God of medicine, remember. Limits exist. Apollo turns Hyacinthus's blood into a flower, the hyacinth. Another plant, another symbol, another reminder that loving Apollo tends to end in botany. This loss genuinely changes him, a little, not dramatically, but there's a quiet sadness that follows Apollo after this. He understands, more deeply now, that immortality does not protect you from grief. It just makes it last longer. Apollo channels this into his work. He focuses on order, on music, on prophecy, on guiding humanity. He becomes less impulsive, slightly. But then comes Niobe. Niobe is a mortal queen with a lot of children and a lot of confidence. She boasts that she is better than Leto, Apollo's mother, because she has more children. This is a mistake, a very loud, public mistake. Apollo and Artemis hear about this. They do not like it. They respond by killing all of Niobe's children. Artemis takes the girls, Apollo takes the boys. Efficiently, calmly, symbolically. Niobe is turned to stone from grief, literally frozen in mourning. This story is often presented as a lesson about humility, which is fair, but it also highlights something about Apollo. He does not tolerate insults to his family, especially his mother. Leto suffered greatly because of Hera. Apollo remembers that, eternally. Apollo's loyalty is deep. His grudges are quiet, but absolute. As centuries pass, Apollo's image evolves. He becomes associated with the sun more strongly, gradually absorbing attributes of Helios. He is depicted as youthful, beardless, perfectly proportioned, the ideal male form. Sculptors adore him. Philosophers reference him. Poets romanticize him. He becomes the symbol of reason over chaos, of clarity over confusion, of light over darkness. And yet, his myths remain full of emotional messes, unintended consequences, and moments of extreme overreaction. This contradiction is part of his appeal. Apollo represents the idea that perfection is a performance, that harmony requires effort, that beauty often hides exhaustion. Even among the gods, Apollo stands slightly apart. He's respected, trusted, sometimes feared, but not always loved. He's too precise, too controlled, too aware. He does not throw tantrums like Ares. He does not manipulate like Hera. He does not indulge like Dionysus. He simply watches, judges, acts. When Apollo does lose control, it's startling, because it's rare, and because it's usually devastating. By now, Apollo has lived through generations of mortals. Cities rise and fall, kings consult him and disappear into history. His temples grow wealthy, his festivals draw crowds, his name becomes synonymous with civilization itself. And still, despite all this, he remains oddly lonely. He has no permanent partner, no divine spouse, no lasting romantic success. He surrounds himself with art, music, prophecy. He mentors, he inspires, but he does not settle. Perhaps he can't. In the next part, we'll drift into Apollo's later myths, his role in philosophy, his quiet rivalry with Dionysus, and the slow shift in how humanity understands him, not as a character in stories, but as an idea. For now, let the golden light soften. Let the flowers fade back into earth. Apollo is still watching, still playing, still waiting. All right, welcome back again. If you nodded off somewhere around a tragic flower origin story, you're doing this exactly right. Let's ease back in. Apollo is still standing in the sunlight, perfectly composed, pretending he doesn't have centuries of unresolved emotional baggage. By this point in Greek mythology, Apollo isn't just a god with stories, He's a concept, a mood, a philosophical posture. And that becomes especially clear when you put him next to his unofficial opposite, Dionysus. Dionysus is the god of wine, madness, ecstasy, theater, and losing yourself on purpose. Apollo is the god of clarity, restraint, balance, and knowing exactly where you left your sandals. They are not enemies exactly, but they're not friends either. They represent two forces the Greeks believed had to coexist. Apollo stands for structure. Dionysus stands for release. Apollo's festivals are orderly, musical, calm. His followers sing hymns. Dionysus's festivals involve masks, intoxication, emotional breakdowns, and at least one person who took it way too far. And yet, both are sacred, both are necessary. Greek thinkers eventually start talking about the Apollonian and the Dionysian as two sides of human existence, reason and passion, light and shadow, control and chaos. Apollo, once a character chasing nymphs and inventing plants, becomes a symbol of the mind itself. And Apollo seems fine with this. He's comfortable being abstract, less drama, fewer flowers. At Delphi, this balance becomes literal. For part of the year, Apollo rules the oracle. The rest of the year, Dionysus takes over. Even the most rational god needs a break. Or maybe the Greeks just understood that clarity isn't sustainable without madness sneaking in now and then. Apollo's relationship with Dionysus is never explosive. It's quiet, tense, polite. The kind of rivalry where both parties know exactly how dangerous the other is, so they keep things civil. Apollo continues guiding mortals through prophecy, and mortals continue misunderstanding him. One man asks if he should trust his friends. Apollo gives a vague answer about loyalty and shadows. The man trusts the wrong people. Disaster. Another asks about founding a city. Apollo gives precise geographic instructions, but leaves out the part about the local population not appreciating colonizers. Disaster again. Apollo never intervenes directly to fix these things. He believes knowledge is enough. What you do with it is your problem. This attitude earns him admiration from philosophers and frustration from basically everyone else. As Greek culture evolves, Apollo becomes associated with education. Young men learn music and poetry in his name. Doctors swear oaths invoking his son Asclepius. Artists pray to him for inspiration. His presence becomes quieter, more refined. The messy love stories fade into the background. The tragic flowers remain, but they're symbols now, not scandals. Apollo is no longer chasing anyone. He's watching humanity mature, or at least attempt to. He still punishes arrogance. He still protects his mother. He still reacts strongly to sacrilege, but he does so with less flair, less personal involvement. He's moved into a managerial role in the universe. And then, slowly, the world changes. Greek gods begin to blend with Roman ones. Apollo remains Apollo. Rare consistency in a pantheon full of rebrands. The Romans adopt him eagerly. They like his order, his discipline, his aesthetic. Emperors associate themselves with Apollo to appear enlightened and balanced. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, is especially fond of him, builds temples, promotes Apollo as a symbol of stability after chaos, which is fitting. Apollo has always thrived after messes. As centuries pass, Apollo's myths are told less as living stories and more as moral examples. He becomes the god of civilization itself, of law, of measured thought. And yet, somewhere underneath all that polish, the original Apollo remains, the god who loved too intensely, who punished too precisely, who turned grief into plants because he didn't know what else to do. He is still defined by contrasts, light that can burn, reason that can justify cruelty, beauty that hides loneliness. Apollo does not fade away dramatically. He doesn't die, he doesn't fall. He simply becomes quieter, more symbolic, less personal. When new religions rise, Apollo lingers in art, in philosophy, in the idea that knowledge brings clarity, in the belief that harmony is worth striving for, even if it's never fully achieved. He becomes less of a god you fear and more of a god you think about. And that might be his final form. A presence rather than a personality, a principle rather than a person. As we drift toward the end of this part, Apollo stands at a distance, golden and calm, watching humanity stumble forward. He no longer interferes as much. He has said what he needed to say, played what he needed to play. The rest is up to us. In the next part, we'll gently bring Apollo's story to a close, looking at his legacy, his symbolism, and why, even now, we're still drawn to this quietly tragic god of light. All right. Welcome back one last time. Or maybe not last, but close enough that things start to feel gentle and resolved. If you've been drifting in and out, that's perfect. Apollo would approve of moderation, even in attention. By now, Apollo is no longer rushing around mythological Greece, solving problems with arrows, plagues, or symbolic horticulture. His loudest stories are behind him. What remains is something quieter, something smoother, the kind of presence that doesn't announce itself anymore. Apollo becomes legacy. As Greek religion slowly shifts from lived belief into cultural memory, Apollo settles into a new role. He's no longer just the god you pray to when your crops fail or your city plans a war. He's the god people reference. Philosophers invoke him, artists borrow his image, thinkers use his name as shorthand for reason, clarity, and restraint. In a way, Apollo finally gets what he always wanted: order, distance, control. The messy emotions are no longer center stage. The rejected lovers fade into poetry. The punishments become morality tales. The plagues turn into metaphors. Apollo is cleaned up, polished, and framed as the ideal. Which is ironic, because if you actually look at his life, he was never ideal. He was just consistent, consistently trying, consistently failing in love, consistently reacting a little too strongly to disrespect, consistently turning grief into something beautiful because he didn't know what else to do with it. As Rome rises and spreads, Apollo travels with it. His temples appear far from Greece. His statues stand in orderly rows. His image is used by emperors who want to appear enlightened rather than brutal. Apollo becomes propaganda. Elegant propaganda, but propaganda all the same. And Apollo doesn't resist this. He's always understood the power of appearances. In Roman art, he is flawless, youthful, calm, muscles carved with mathematical precision, no emotional strain, no regret, no flowers growing from blood, just perfection. But myths have a way of leaking through the cracks. Writers continue to tell his old stories. Poets linger on Daphne, on Hyacinthus, on Cassandra, on the strange cruelty of a god who valued truth but punished those who didn't respond to it correctly. Apollo becomes a case study. Is reason truly gentle? Is clarity always kind? Does light heal, or does it expose things people weren't ready to see? These questions follow him quietly through history. During the Renaissance, Apollo makes a comeback. Artists adore him, scholars resurrect him. He becomes the patron of intellect, science, and art. Painters depict him with instruments, books, and soft light. He is no longer dangerous, he is inspiring. And yet, the irony remains. The god most associated with balance never found it himself. The god of harmony lived a life full of unresolved tension. Apollo never married, never settled, never longing. Even when he became symbolic, the undertone of loneliness remained. He is the god who stands apart, always present, rarely involved. And that might be the most human thing about him. Apollo's final transformation is subtle. He stops being worshipped and starts being understood, or at least interpreted. He becomes an idea people argue about, a symbol people project onto, a mirror for whatever age is looking at him. To some, he represents science and reason triumphing over superstition. To others, he represents cold logic suppressing emotion. To artists, he's inspiration. To philosophers, discipline. To storytellers, tragedy disguised as beauty. Apollo contains all of it, because he always has. If you trace his story from the beginning, his mother hunted, his birth delayed, his early violence, his endless failed loves, you start to see a pattern. Apollo is always reacting to a world that refuses to behave as neatly as he wants it to. He doesn't rage like Zeus. He doesn't scheme like Hera. He doesn't collapse into chaos like Dionysus. He responds with structure, with rules, with consequences. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But he keeps going. And maybe that's why Apollo lasts. Not because he's perfect, but because he's persistent. As the centuries roll on, Apollo fades into the background hum of Western thought. His lyre becomes music theory. His prophecy becomes logic. His healing becomes medicine. His plagues become epidemiology. His sunlight becomes enlightenment, literally and metaphorically. And still, somewhere beneath all of that, there's the god who once stood helpless over a dying boy, unable to save him, turning grief into a flower and pretending that was enough. Apollo never stops being tragic. He just becomes quiet about it. So, as we gently close his story, imagine him not as a statue or a symbol, but as he's always been in myth, standing slightly apart, watching, thinking, waiting. The sun sets, not dramatically, just slowly, calmly. The light softens, the sharp edges blur. Apollo does not demand attention anymore. He's content to let the world carry on without him. And on that note, you can let your thoughts do the same. All right. You're still here. Or maybe you aren't, and this is just sound drifting through a half-sleep. Either way, that's fine. Apollo has always done his best work when no one is paying very close attention. By the time we reach this part of his story, Apollo has technically outlived belief itself. Not just mortals, not just empires. Entire ways of thinking have risen, argued with him, borrowed from him, and then quietly moved on. And Apollo remains, not as a god you kneel to, but as a presence you keep bumping into. Because Apollo never really leaves. Long after temples crumble and oracles fall silent, Apollo's personality gets absorbed into systems, into habits, into expectations. He becomes the invisible standard behind ideas like objectivity and reason. He's there whenever someone insists that logic should prevail, even when emotions are inconvenient. And this is where Apollo becomes complicated again. Because reason sounds noble, clean, calm, but Apollo's version of reason was never neutral. It was precise, and precision can be unforgiving. Think of Cassandra. She had truth, pure truth. Apollo gave it to her, but he also ensured it would destroy her life. She became a warning that knowledge alone is not power. Being right doesn't protect you. Being clear doesn't save you. Apollo understood that. He just didn't fix it. As civilizations evolve, people start to notice the downside of Apollonian thinking. Too much order becomes rigidity. Too much clarity becomes cruelty. Too much light leaves nowhere to hide. And slowly, quietly, Apollo steps back again. Not banished, just balanced. He exists alongside uncertainty now, alongside emotion, alongside chaos. Dionysus never really lost that rivalry. The world learned it needed both. Apollo's legacy becomes moderation itself, a reminder that discipline is useful, but not sufficient, that beauty matters, but not at the expense of compassion, that truth without empathy can wound just as deeply as lies. Which is ironic, because Apollo never quite mastered empathy himself. He tried, in his own way. When he punished, he believed it was deserved. When he loved, he believed it was sincere. When he withdrew, he believed it was necessary. He was never malicious, just exacting. Apollo is the god of consequences, not explosions, not chaos, just outcomes. You do this, this happens. And in a universe that often feels random, that kind of structure is comforting, even if it's harsh. That's why Apollo remains appealing. He promises that the world makes sense, that actions matter, that order exists, even if we don't always like it. And when people stop believing that, they tend to drift away from him. But then, inevitably, they drift back. In moments of crisis, Apollo resurfaces. During plagues, people remember he once ruled disease and healing. During intellectual revolutions, he's invoked as the patron of enlightenment. During artistic renaissances, his name appears in manifestos and museums. Apollo becomes cyclical, just like the sun he was eventually associated with. Rising, fading, returning, and always the same. If you imagine Apollo now, he is no longer standing on Olympus. That place doesn't exist anymore. Instead, he's somewhere abstract, somewhere quiet, maybe in a library at night, maybe in a hospital hallway, maybe in a music room after everyone has left. He's present where systems exist, where rules are enforced, where clarity is demanded. He's also present in the discomfort that follows. Apollo never learned how to soften his edges. He just learned how to disappear behind ideas. And maybe that's the final, gentlest tragedy of his story. He wanted to bring harmony. He wanted to illuminate. He wanted to heal. And he did, sometimes. But he also taught humanity that perfection is exhausting, that balance is fragile, that light can be tiring if it never turns off, which is why night exists, and why sleep exists, and why, after all this quiet storytelling, it's okay to let Apollo rest too. His work is done. His symbols are everywhere. He doesn't need your attention anymore. So if your thoughts start drifting now, that's fine. Let them blur. Let reason loosen its grip. Let the light dim without explanation. Apollo won't mind. He's used to being misunderstood, used to being remembered incorrectly, used to being present without being needed. And, honestly, that's probably the most peaceful ending he could have hoped for. All right. If you're still awake, welcome back. And if you're not, this part will still be here, drifting along quietly, like background light through closed curtains. Apollo has always been comfortable speaking into the void. By now, Apollo exists in a strange place, not alive in the old sense, not worshipped, not feared, but also not gone. He's settled into the long afterlife of ideas, where gods go when people stop building temples but keep using their names. This is where Apollo becomes less myth and more habit. Every time someone insists on objective truth, every time someone believes facts alone should settle an argument, every time someone says emotions are getting in the way of reason, that's Apollo quietly clearing his throat. Not loudly, never loudly, just enough to remind everyone that structure still matters. And yet, the world he helped shape keeps proving something he never fully accepted. Humans are not built for pure clarity. They crave meaning more than accuracy, comfort more than truth. Apollo offered truth anyway, whether it landed softly or not, which explains why he was always respected more than loved. As modern thinking develops, Apollo's influence fractures. Science claims him, art claims him, philosophy claims him, Medicine claims him. Each takes a piece and leaves the rest behind. The healer forgets the plague. The artist forgets the punishment. The philosopher forgets the grief. Apollo is streamlined, simplified, made palatable. But myths are stubborn. They don't disappear just because they're inconvenient. They linger in footnotes, in metaphors, in the strange discomfort people feel when logic wins an argument but somehow loses the room. That discomfort, that's Apollo again, standing there, arms crossed, wondering why no one seems grateful. Apollo never understood why truth didn't automatically lead to peace. He assumed clarity would soothe people, that once they knew the facts, harmony would follow. Instead, clarity often led to panic, or denial, or anger. Mortals blamed the message. Apollo blamed their interpretation. And so the cycle repeated. He gives knowledge, they misuse it. He withdraws, over and over across centuries. Eventually, Apollo stops trying to correct anyone. He becomes passive, observational, almost philosophical himself. If humans want chaos, they'll find it. If they want order, they'll borrow his name. Either way, Apollo doesn't interfere anymore. There's a quiet dignity in that. No more punishments, no more arrows, no more flowers growing from grief. Just distance, and maybe relief. Because being the god of light is exhausting. There's nowhere to hide, no room to be uncertain, no excuse for hesitation. Apollo spent eternity being expected to be correct, always correct. That kind of pressure wears even on gods. So if Apollo could sleep, this would be the era where he finally does. He rests inside systems now, inside institutions, inside the assumption that things should make sense, that causes should lead to effects, that knowledge should improve lives. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Apollo watches without comment, and this, quietly, is his most mature form. No reactions, no punishments, no wounded pride, just acceptance that his influence is limited. The god of reason finally understands the limits of reason. It took him a few thousand years. As we drift through this final stretch of his story, there's nothing left to resolve. No final love, no last prophecy, no dramatic disappearance. Apollo doesn't end. He just becomes background noise, a steady hum of logic beneath the chaos of being human. And when that hum gets too loud, when the world becomes cold, rigid, overly precise, people instinctively turn it down. They reach for emotion, for art, for irrational joy. Dionysus smiles somewhere. Apollo doesn't object. Balance, after all, was always the goal, even if he never quite achieved it himself. So if your thoughts feel fuzzy now, that's fine. Let them be fuzzy. Apollo won't correct you. Not tonight. Tonight is for rest, for letting the light fade without explanation, for allowing the world to exist without fully understanding it. Apollo can wait. He always does. All right. Welcome back. Or welcome halfway. Or welcome in that soft, uncertain space where you're not entirely sure if you're listening or dreaming. That's a good place for Apollo. He's always preferred the in-between. By now, Apollo has been quiet for a very long time. Not absent, just quiet. The world keeps inventing new ways to explain itself, new sciences, new philosophies, new systems meant to replace the old ones, and almost all of them quietly borrow something from Apollo, whether they admit it or not. Order, measurement, prediction, the belief that things should be understandable. Apollo doesn't announce his influence anymore. He doesn't need to. His fingerprints are everywhere, in calendars, in schedules, in the expectation that tomorrow will resemble today in at least some logical way. He is the reason people get uncomfortable with uncertainty. And yet, uncertainty never goes away. That's the part Apollo eventually learns to live with. In the ancient world, people blamed gods when things didn't make sense. In the modern world, they blame systems, or data, or themselves. The names change, but the discomfort doesn't. Apollo watches this with a kind of detached sympathy. He remembers Cassandra. He remembers Delphi. He remembers how carefully he spoke, and how little that helped. So he stops speaking altogether, not out of anger, out of resignation. Apollo becomes something you consult without realizing it. When you trust a diagnosis, when you believe a forecast, when you assume that understanding a problem should make it easier to bear. Sometimes it does, sometimes it makes it heavier, and Apollo knows that now. If he could look back on his own myths, he might notice a pattern he missed the first time around. Every tragedy wasn't caused by ignorance. Many were caused by knowing too much, too soon, without the ability to change the outcome. Cassandra knew. Oedipus knew. Niobe knew, eventually. Knowledge didn't save them. It just sharpened the pain. Apollo never meant for that to happen, but intention doesn't erase consequence. He was the god of light, not comfort, and light, by its nature, exposes. So in this later, quieter age, Apollo becomes careful. He limits himself. He allows ambiguity to exist. He shares space with doubt. This is his most human evolution. Not dominance, not perfection, acceptance. He accepts that clarity is not always kindness, that harmony requires more than rules, that balance isn't something you impose, it's something you negotiate, constantly, imperfectly. Apollo finally understands Dionysus, not as a rival, but as a necessary counterweight. Emotion fills the gaps logic leaves behind. Chaos softens rigidity. Madness reminds order not to take itself too seriously. If Apollo smiles now, it's subtle, almost unnoticeable. He doesn't chase love anymore. He doesn't punish pride. He doesn't demand reverence. He lets the world be inconsistent, and in doing so, he becomes lighter, less burdened by expectation, less trapped by the need to be correct, less defined by the role others assigned him thousands of years ago. The sun still rises, but no one needs Apollo to push it anymore. The systems run themselves. The stories tell themselves. The world spins without checking in. Apollo watches, hands folded, content, enough. And if this feels like an ending, that's okay. Not a dramatic ending, not a final statement, just a soft fade, like lights being turned off in a building one floor at a time. No announcement, no ceremony, just quiet. Apollo doesn't vanish when the last light goes out. He simply becomes unnecessary, which for a god who carried so much responsibility for so long might be the greatest piece of all. If your thoughts drift now, let them. You don't need to understand anything else tonight. Apollo won't quiz you. He won't test you. He won't demand clarity. He's done asking. And you're done listening. All right. If this part reaches you, you're either very dedicated, very relaxed, or hovering somewhere between consciousness and sleep, where time feels a little soft around the edges. That's fine. Apollo doesn't mind repetition. He lived through centuries of it. By now, Apollo exists in the quietest possible way. Not as a god, not as a warning, not even as a lesson, just as an assumption. The assumption that the world can be understood, that patterns exist, that chaos is temporary, that light will eventually explain things. Apollo used to be that explanation. Now he's just the idea behind it. And ideas don't get lonely the way gods do. Or at least if they do, they don't complain. The strange thing about Apollo's long fade is that it isn't a loss. No tragedy, no collapse, no fall from grace. He simply becomes unnecessary, in the way air conditioning becomes unnecessary on a cool night. You don't notice when it turns off, you just feel relief. Humanity no longer needs a god to justify reason. Reason stands on its own now, or pretends to. Apollo watches people build models of reality, charts, theories, predictions, forecasts, entire careers devoted to explaining why things happen the way they do. And for the most part, he approves, quietly. But he also notices something familiar. No matter how advanced the system, people still want certainty, still want reassurance, still want to know that everything fits together cleanly. And it never quite does. Apollo recognizes that feeling. It's the same frustration he felt at Delphi, the same disappointment he felt watching mortals twist his words into disasters, the same confusion he felt when love didn't respond logically. The world keeps repeating his lessons without realizing where they came from, and Apollo doesn't correct them. Correction was never his strength anyway. In this late, nearly forgotten phase, Apollo is gentler than he's ever been. Not because he's changed dramatically, but because nothing is asking anything of him anymore. No prayers, no sacrifices, no expectations, just quiet relevance. He shows up in small, almost invisible ways, in the way people trust routines, in the comfort of schedules, in the belief that tomorrow will probably follow today in a recognizable pattern. Those beliefs are soothing. Apollo knows that. He built his entire identity around soothing chaos. But he also knows they're fragile. One unexpected event can shatter them. One unanswered question can unravel them. One moment of grief can make logic feel hollow. Apollo has seen this happen too many times to be surprised. So he waits, not for worship, not for revival, just for balance, because balance was always the point, even when he missed it himself. Apollo no longer competes with Dionysus. The rivalry dissolved ages ago. They coexist now in every human life, reason and emotion trading control back and forth, hour by hour, mood by mood. Apollo speaks when structure is needed. Dionysus speaks when release is needed. Neither wins, neither should. If Apollo could offer one final prophecy, it wouldn't be cryptic or grand. It would be almost disappointingly simple. You will never fully understand everything. And that's fine. He learned that the hard way. So in this final stretch of his story, Apollo doesn't stand in sunlight anymore. He stands in twilight, that calm, colorless space where things don't need sharp definitions, where answers are optional, where certainty can rest, where light doesn't interrogate darkness, it just softens it. And if you're drifting now, if your thoughts feel unstructured, if nothing quite connects, that's okay. Apollo isn't keeping score. He's not measuring, not judging, not correcting. He's letting things be slightly unresolved, which might be the most generous thing he ever learned to do. So let your breathing slow. Let the world remain unfinished. Let meaning loosen its grip. Apollo is quiet now, and quiet is enough. All right. If you've made it this far, your mind is probably doing that gentle drifting thing. Thoughts starting and stopping without asking permission. That's perfect. Apollo has finally stopped asking questions too. At this point, there is very little left for him to do. The systems are in place. The ideas are circulating. The habits continue without supervision. Apollo once believed the world needed constant illumination, that without light, everything would fall apart. But time has shown him something quieter and more forgiving. The world functions just fine in dimness. People make choices without complete information. They move forward without certainty. They accept contradictions. They live with unanswered questions and still manage to sleep at night. Apollo watches this with a kind of peaceful disbelief. If someone had told him, back when Delphi was loud with voices and incense, that ambiguity would one day be tolerated, Shenzhou welcomed, he wouldn't have believed it. He spent centuries trying to eliminate it. And now, here it is, everywhere. Doctors admit uncertainty, scientists revise conclusions, philosophers argue without expecting final answers. Even prophecies, when they exist at all, are framed as probabilities instead of truths. Apollo nods. This is better. Not perfect, never perfect, but gentler. He no longer feels the urge to intervene, the need to correct, the reflex to punish misunderstanding. He has learned that clarity is most useful when people ask for it, and even then, in small doses. The sun still rises. That part is automatic now. No divine management required. The universe hums along on its own rules. Apollo rests inside those rules,
no longer responsible for them. If you imagine him now, he isn't standing or watching. He's sitting, somewhere quiet, somewhere neutral, not light, not dark, just still. He's thinking, not about mortals or truth or balance, but about nothing in particular. And that might be the closest thing to happiness he ever found. Apollo spent most of his existence reacting to insults, to desire, to misunderstanding, to chaos. He mistook reaction for purpose. Only in this long silence does he realize something simple. Purpose doesn't need constant motion. Sometimes it's enough to exist. And so Apollo exists, without urgency, without expectation, without needing to be right. The myths don't need him anymore. They've already done their work. The stories have been told, the symbols are embedded. All that's left is rest. This is the part no one ever wrote down in ancient texts, the afterlife, the phase where even legacy stops demanding attention. Apollo becomes background stillness, the soft, predictable parts of life, the unremarkable reliability of daylight, the quiet satisfaction of things mostly making sense. Nothing dramatic, nothing divine, just calm. If your thoughts drift off completely now, that's okay. You won't miss anything important. Apollo isn't going anywhere. He's not about to reveal a final truth or issue one last prophecy. He's done speaking. The questions can sleep. The answers can wait. The light can dim. And you can rest.
Here we are, the last part. If your eyes are heavy and your thoughts are slowing, that's exactly where they should be, and exactly where Apollo has been, quietly, for a very long time. By now, Apollo isn't a god you pray to. He isn't a myth you memorize. He isn't a symbol actively invoked. He exists in the quiet spaces between thought and action, between knowledge and feeling, between expectation and acceptance. He is, in a sense, everywhere, but only as a soft background note. The world has moved on. Empires rise and fall. Cultures shift. People forget the details of his stories. They remember only fragments, a laurel wreath here, a lyre there, a vague sense that clarity is good and beauty matters. That's enough. Apollo doesn't need more. And in that quiet, Apollo finally rests. He rests from judgment. He rests from correcting. He rests from trying to make mortals live up to his exacting standards. He rests from trying to be perfect himself. For the first time, he experiences something he never allowed himself before: true detachment. Not disinterest, not abandonment, just stillness. The kind of stillness that allows the world to breathe without divine interference. Even the tragedies that once defined him, Daphne, Cassandra, Hyacinthus, Niobe, and Coronis, no longer pull at him with urgency. They exist as memories, faint and gentle, lessons embedded in the world rather than dramas demanding resolution. Apollo can observe them without grief, without anger, without desire. Time no longer presses on him.
The endless centuries of expectation no longer weigh down his shoulders. He exists, simply, as a witness, a quiet presence in the spaces humans fill with thought, art, reasoning, and intuition. And in this final state, Apollo is peaceful, not radiant in the way he once was, not brilliant or commanding, just calm, balanced finally, not because he achieved perfection, but because he stopped striving for it. If you imagine the sun setting slowly, spilling gold and pink across a quiet landscape, that is Apollo now. Not demanding attention, not imposing clarity, just being light, just being still, just being. And as you let your mind follow that same slow descent, you might notice something else. Apollo's story is done, but the echoes remain in thought, in music, in art, in the quiet insistence that order and beauty matter, that even if the world is messy, clarity is possible, that even if love and life are fleeting, something endures. And with that, you can let yourself drift completely. No need for endings, no need for answers, just the soft hum of history, mythology, and the calm presence of a God who finally lets go. All right, let's settle in one final time. Dim the lights even further. Let your body feel heavier with every breath. Maybe stretch slightly, then let the tension release. That's perfect. We're going to drift slowly through the very last layer of Apollo's story. Not the bright, dramatic moments that make headlines in mythology books, but the quiet, enduring essence. The way Apollo lingers long after the temples are gone, after the oracles have fallen silent, and after mortals have stopped paying attention. By now, you know him, or at least you know the stories that survive. The radiant child born of Leto, abandoned to exile, rescued by a drifting island. The golden-haired god who skipped awkward adolescence and emerged fully formed, gifted, talented, and annoyingly perfect. The twin who was both Artemis's opposite and her mirror, embodying light, clarity, reason, and that inevitable sense of destiny. The one who healed, predicted, played music, punished arrogance, loved disastrously, and left flowers behind as memorials for grief he could not otherwise manage. That is Apollo, the god of contradictions, of brilliance and subtle cruelty, of beauty and persistent melancholy. And yet, what has he really been across all of these centuries? Beyond the stories, beyond the poetry, beyond the music, beyond the morality tales and the terrifyingly precise punishments. He has been an idea. Not an idea in the abstract, not a concept codified in philosophy or art alone, but an idea in motion, in narrative, in practice, in how humans attempt to structure the world around them. He is the principle that knowledge and reason matter, that light illuminates shadow, that structure can guide chaos, but cannot entirely contain it. Apollo's life, like his stories, has always been a negotiation between extremes,
between passion and reason, between chaos and control, between mortal unpredictability and divine expectation. Every myth, every tale of romantic failure, every punishment, every prophecy, every disastrous love, every miraculous act of healing, they were all experiments in balance. And if you look closely, you can see the same pattern repeating in subtle ways. Knowledge brings both power and responsibility. Light exposes both beauty and imperfection. Clarity cannot guarantee contentment. Let's take a moment to trace that pattern. First, there is desire. Apollo loved, passionately, intensely, recklessly in the human sense. Daphne, Cassandra, Hyacinthus, Coronis, and many others. Each illustrates the tension between immortal desire and mortal response. Apollo, the god of clarity, is repeatedly blind to the emotional consequences of his own affection. He assumes that his love, radiant and pure, should be accepted, reciprocated, or at least understood. When it is not, the outcomes are tragic. Trees grow from grief. Children die. Gifts of foresight are twisted into curses. These stories are not just moral warnings about arrogance, rejection, or hubris. They are subtle reflections on the limits of reason when applied to human emotion. Apollo, for all his brilliance, is perpetually negotiating forces he does not fully control. Next, there is punishment. Apollo enforces order, but he enforces it with a precision that often seems cruel. Python is slain. Niobe's children perish. Marsyas is flayed. Plagues strike those who disrespect him or his priests. In these acts, we see the god of light grappling with imperfection. He cannot tolerate chaos entirely, yet his methods are unyielding. This is a quiet lesson. Order cannot simply be imposed, and sometimes even the most meticulous execution of rules does not achieve harmony. Humans and gods will still stumble. Then there is the pursuit of beauty and knowledge. Apollo is the god of music, poetry, medicine, prophecy, and art. He embodies the human aspiration toward perfection, toward creation, toward understanding. Yet these pursuits are never free from complication. Music competitions end in death. Prophecies are misunderstood. Healing cannot always prevent loss. Knowledge does not automatically bring comfort. Here, Apollo's story mirrors a fundamental truth. The tools we use to illuminate the world, reason, art, science, are powerful but incomplete. They reveal as much as they conceal. They comfort and they wound. And the person or God wielding them is never without imperfection. Finally, there is the evolution of time. Perhaps the most striking aspect of Apollo is not his brilliance or his mistakes, but his endurance. He moves from active participation in mortal affairs to symbolic presence, to abstract principle. He is adopted by Rome. He is invoked by emperors. He is celebrated by artists, philosophers, and poets. Yet he also fades into quiet background influence. He is less a character
and more a framework. He becomes the silent standard behind reason and structure and clarity. And eventually, he becomes entirely unnecessary in a literal sense. The sun rises, science explains, civilization functions, human systems operate without consultation. And still, Apollo remains, imperceptibly, as the hum behind order. This is perhaps the most profound element of his story. Apollo's greatness is not in domination, not in perfection, not in constant intervention. It is in presence, in persistence, in the ability to remain relevant without demanding attention. He teaches not by force, but by enduring example. His lessons are not always dramatic. They do not always land. They drift across time like sunlight through leaves, subtle, pervasive, unnoticed, until you realize how much of your world is colored by it. And this is why at the very end of all these tales, Apollo is still valuable. Not because he commands attention or resolves conflicts, not because he heals or punishes, not because he is brilliant or radiant or terrifyingly competent. He is valuable because he exemplifies continuity. He embodies the principle that reason and order can coexist with chaos and emotion, not perfectly, not completely, but sufficiently to guide a civilization. And perhaps more importantly, he embodies the acknowledgement that even gods can fail, that even brilliance carries imperfection, and that balance is a pursuit rather than a permanent state. If we think of Apollo as a god of dualities, reason and passion, light and shadow, clarity and chaos, we see that his story is also a meditation on the human condition. He reflects our aspirations, our mistakes, our moments of brilliance and of misjudgment. He is the ever-present reminder that striving toward knowledge and beauty is worthwhile, even when the results are messy, even when grief intrudes, even when clarity comes too late. Apollo's love stories, his punishments, his triumphs and his failures, they all serve to illustrate that life, even when guided by light, is complex, that love may not be reciprocated, that knowledge may not prevent tragedy, that beauty may be ephemeral, and that light itself cannot erase the shadows. Yet the story closes not with violence or heartbreak, but with calm. Apollo rests, not because he has achieved perfection, but because he has endured. He has witnessed centuries of human effort, error, and creativity. He has guided, inspired, and observed, and now he exists quietly, allowing the world to unfold without interference, his presence felt subtly, like a soft golden glow at dawn. This is the true lesson of Apollo. It is a lesson not of drama or sensationalism, but of quiet persistence. It is the lesson that influence does not require spectacle, that wisdom need not dominate, that clarity can coexist with mystery, that even beings of immense power must eventually accept limits, step back, and trust the world to find its own way. And perhaps in this final reflection, there is a gentle reminder for us as well, that in our own lives, striving for understanding, balance, and beauty is meaningful even if outcomes are imperfect, that mistakes are inevitable, that grief may transform into something unexpected but still valuable, that presence, patience, and quiet observation can be forms of power and wisdom. Apollo's story ends not with a final act or a dramatic flourish, but with the acceptance of the natural order. Sun rises, sun sets, time passes, light and shadow continue their endless dance. Knowledge guides imperfect beings. Chaos exists alongside reason, and Apollo, the god who once chased nymphs, healed mortals, punished arrogance, and inspired humanity, simply continues as the subtle hum behind it all. So, as we slowly drift to the close of this long story, let us leave Apollo there, standing in twilight, observing without interference, smiling faintly at the persistence of life, the endless repetition of human mistakes and triumphs, the beauty that emerges even from imperfection. He is neither gone nor dominant. He simply is, steady, calm, luminous, patient. Take a deep breath. Let your thoughts soften. Let the stories we have traced fade gently into memory. Let the rhythm of your breathing match the slow, inevitable turning of time. Apollo has guided us, taught us, observed us, and now he rests, and we can rest too. No more explanations, no more clarifications, no need to resolve every story, just the soft glow of a God who understood, eventually, that presence, persistence, and patience are sometimes enough. And as the world turns quietly, and as your mind drifts further into calm, let us leave Apollo in that stillness, eternal, enduring, subtle, and finally, completely at peace. Here we are, the very last stretch, the point where words themselves begin to soften, where sentences no longer demand attention, and where the rhythm of thought slows into a gentle, unbroken flow. This is the space where Apollo truly rests, not as a god of myths and shrines, not as a figure immortalized in poetry or song, not as the radiant, powerful, and sometimes terrifying figure who shaped the fates of mortals, but as a presence, subtle and unassuming, that continues to linger softly in the background of everything. A quiet light that persists even when no one is watching. A principle woven into the very rhythms of the world, always there, unnoticed, unhurried. Imagine him now. Picture him standing, or perhaps sitting, since millennia of power allow a god to relax, bathed in a soft twilight glow, the edges of light and shadow blending without need for contrast. He is no longer radiant in the sun, though the sun still rises and sets, carrying the rhythm of his essence. He does not punish, he does not pursue, he does not demand attention or admiration. Fear does not ripple in his presence, nor awe, nor the tense excitement that mortals once felt when they approached Delphi. Apollo is present, still, patient, watching quietly as the world turns, as humans live their lives, as empires rise and fall, as art is created and destroyed, as knowledge grows and reshapes itself over centuries. A light that exists without imposing itself, a presence that guides without forcing. Apollo no longer responds to mortal mistakes. He does not intervene to correct error, to mitigate grief, or to provide clarity where humans struggle. He has learned that effort is sometimes futile, that the pursuit of balance does not always yield harmony, and that knowledge, even in its brightest form, cannot prevent suffering. Light illuminates, yes, but illumination can also reveal shadows that were previously hidden, shadows that unsettle and discomfort. The lessons of the past, as harsh as they were, linger not because Apollo demanded them, but because the world cannot escape them. And now he accepts this. He accepts the limits of guidance, the impossibility of perfection, and the fact that even gods are subject to constraints beyond their own making. And yet he is not diminished by this understanding. In fact, in this quiet acceptance there is a kind of strength and grace that surpasses his former brilliance. He exists now in calm observation, in the gentle hum of a universe that operates largely without his active interference. Sun rises, sun sets, seasons turn, music is made and appreciated. People continue their lives weaving patterns of love, struggle, success, and failure. Apollo is present in all of it, not as a manipulator, but as a subtle guide. He has moved beyond drama, beyond tragedy, beyond the desperate need to prove his power, beyond glory and punishment. He has entered a phase of pure endurance, a serene persistence, influence that no longer demands recognition, attention, or even gratitude, a quiet light that simply exists, sustaining, gently shaping, and witnessing. In this final stage, Apollo has achieved something rare, a state close to what humans might consider eternal peace. He is no longer caught in the endless cycles of desire, punishment, and achievement that marked his earlier life. He no longer feels the urgency to correct, to heal, to punish, to inspire. He simply observes. He quietly exists in the space between events, in the pause between cause and effect, in the intervals where life unfolds without intervention. And in that quiet there is calm, there is contentment, there is a deep, enduring understanding that life, even chaotic and unpredictable, does not require constant correction. His story, once filled with tragedies, victories, and elaborate mythic arcs, has softened into memory. The tales of Daphne, Hyacinthus, Cassandra, and others remain, but they no longer command his attention. He does not grieve, he does not rage, he does not rejoice. He simply allows these stories to exist as echoes in the corridors of human imagination, each one a reminder of his influence, each one a trace of light in the larger tapestry of time. He is no longer entwined with mortal suffering or desire. He has moved beyond the need for recognition, beyond the necessity of being understood, beyond the compulsion to correct errors. He simply is. Consider for a moment the quiet power of this state. Apollo, the god who once demanded attention, who punished hubris, who loved with intensity, who exposed truths without mercy, who inspired both reverence and fear, has transitioned into a form that requires nothing. No temples, no sacrifices, no prayers, no mortal acknowledgement. His presence is subtle, pervasive, quiet. It exists in patterns, in structures, in habits, in the rhythms of life that humans often take for granted. It is in the consistency of the sun rising, the reliability of seasons, the human pursuit of understanding, the persistence of beauty, the effort to maintain balance in a messy, unpredictable world. He is finally steady. Apollo no longer needs to intervene. The world continues. Humans stumble, falter, succeed, fail, and recover. Societies rise, collapse, and rebuild. Knowledge is accumulated, interpreted, misunderstood, and reinterpreted. And through all of it, Apollo remains, watching without judgment, present without imposition. He has transitioned from active participant to enduring principle. His light does not blind. His presence does not dominate. It simply exists, subtle, comforting, stabilizing. In this extended quiet, Apollo has also come to understand something crucial, that life does not need constant correction, that knowledge is powerful, yes, but only in proportion to understanding, that clarity does not automatically bring comfort, that beauty does not ensure happiness, that light cannot erase shadow. And yet, in the interplay of all these forces, there is meaning, there is rhythm, there is persistence, there is value. Apollo's own evolution from a god who actively shaped and punished to a presence that simply exists is a reflection of human journey as well. The recognition that control is limited, that mistakes are inevitable, that perfection is unattainable, and that calm observation is often more powerful than intervention. Even the dualities that once defined him, reason and emotion, clarity and chaos, light and shadow, have become part of his quiet equilibrium. He no longer needs to resolve them. He no longer needs to enforce dominance of one over the other. They coexist, intertwined, balanced, imperfectly perfect, and Apollo observes without interference. Dionysus still dances in human behavior, still embodies emotion and release, still exists as the necessary counterbalance. Apollo does not resent him. He does not compete. He simply acknowledges the truth. One cannot have order without chaos, clarity without confusion, light without shadow. And this is the essence of his final enduring state. A state that is not dramatic, not sensational, not grand. It is calm, gentle, and infinitely patient. He has become a presence felt rather than noticed, a hum beneath the noise, a soft light that neither blinds nor demands attention. He is a quiet teacher now, not instructing, not punishing, not judging, but simply existing, reminding by virtue of persistence alone that clarity, beauty, and reason matter, even when humans stumble, even when they fail, even when they forget.
If you imagine Apollo now, in this timeless space, he is sitting or standing beneath a twilight sky. Perhaps he is on a hill overlooking a quiet city. Perhaps in a forest where sunlight drifts lazily through the leaves. Perhaps in a space that exists only in the mind, a place of calm and reflection beyond human measurement. He is at rest and yet entirely present. The weight of millennia has settled into something light, almost imperceptible. He watches without interference, smiles faintly, and allows the world to continue without his command. And this, in many ways, is the most profound lesson of Apollo's long life. Power does not need to be forceful. Influence does not need to be loud. Light does not need to burn. Clarity does not need to punish. Endurance, presence, and quiet observation can be more profound than dramatic action, more lasting than temporary triumphs, more humane than harsh judgment. Apollo's story, which began with dramatic birth, fiery contests, tragic love, and divine punishment, ends not with spectacle, but with serenity. The world continues to evolve. Human beings continue to build, to fail, to love, to lose, to create, to destroy, to learn, to forget, to strive, and through all of it, Apollo exists as a stabilizing force in the background, not as a god demanding worship, not as a character in a story screaming for attention, not as a moral arbiter or punisher, just as a subtle, steady light, quietly ensuring that the rhythms of life, learning, and art are possible. And so, as we drift to the close of this meditation on Apollo, we can let ourselves relax fully. Let the weight of the day ease from our shoulders. Let the mind soften its edges. Let the stories, the histories, the mythologies, the echoes of centuries of thought and imagination settle into memory. Let the sun fade slowly in your mind, letting Apollo's quiet light linger at the periphery, steady, calm, persistent. Take a deep, slow breath. Feel it expand through your chest and then release, letting every lingering thought soften into calm. Know that Apollo watches, softly, without expectation or judgment, allowing the world to continue,
allowing life to unfold in all its messy, imperfect, beautiful rhythm. He has done his work, he has endured, he has persisted, and now he rests. And in that rest we find a lesson that presence can be quiet, that influence can be gentle, that eternity does not require action, that light in its most profound form can exist without interference, without insistence, without urgency, that the hum of existence, calm and steady, is sometimes enough. Let your body sink further into comfort. Let your mind drift slowly, like sunlight fading into evening. Let every tension, every worry, every insistence on clarity dissolve. Apollo is here. Apollo is calm. Apollo is light, persistent, quiet. And now you can rest too. Sleep. Let the world continue softly around you. Let the light fade. Let the stories settle. Apollo remains, softly watching, the eternal quiet light between stories, and everything is, finally, at peace.